Hi class, today we're looking at Chapter 8, Lesson 2, Solving Two-Step Equations. What we will learn is how to solve a two-step equation and how to solve real-world problems involving two-step equations. A two-step equation is a mathematical sentence stating that two expressions are equal and it contains two operations. So here are the steps for solving two-step equations. Number 1, solve for any addition or subtraction on the variable side of the equation by undoing the operation from both sides of the equation. So in other words, you want to add or subtract the constant first. Step number 2, solve any multiplication or division from variable side of the equation by undoing the operation from both sides of the equation. And this also means that you would either multiply or divide by the coefficient. Go ahead and turn your notes over to the back side. Now in our first example, we have 12.5d plus 15 equals negative 3.75. Now in this case, our very first step is to undo the plus 15 and using the inverse operation, which means minus 15. So we're going to subtract 15 from each side of our equation. And we are now left with 12.5d equals, we have negative 3.75 minus 15, which means the integer rules are telling us to keep the sign and add. So negative 18.75. And the next step is to divide each side by 12.5. Now once we divide the 12.5 from each side, you are now left with d equals negative 1.5. And the next step that we can do is check our solution. So we substitute in negative 1.5 times 12.5. So take the 12.5 and times it by negative 1.5, and we add 15 equals negative 3.75. So in this case, 12.5 times the negative 1.5 is negative 18.75. And when we add 15, we end up with the solution of negative 3.75. So our answer is correct. So D really is negative 1.5, and that is our final answer. Now let's take a look at example B. So in this case, we're going to undo our subtraction by adding. So we're going to add 8 to each side. And I end up with negative 8 plus 8, which is 0. And I'm left with 1 over 12u. Now, in this step, we have to isolate the coefficient. And this is a multiplication problem, but we are multiplying by a fraction. So in reality, we are actually going to have to times it by the reciprocal to each side. So we multiply each side by 12 over 1. We're able to cross-cancel our 12 over 1 and our 1/12, which leaves us with u. So u equals 0 times 12 over 1. Anything times 0 is 0. So let's double check our solution to make sure we are correct. And we go 1/12 times 0 minus 8 equals 8. Or sorry, negative 8. So 1/12 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 8 equals negative 8. And that is a true statement. So our answer really is u equals 0. Now in example C, we have 7p plus 11 equals 46.7. We're going to first isolate the constant by subtracting by 11 to each side of our equation. So we're left with 7p equals 46.7 minus 11, which gives us 35.7. We divide now by the coefficient to each side, and we're left with p equals 5.1. So now we want to double check to make sure we are correct. So we take 7 times 5.1 plus 11 equals 46.7. So 7 times 5.1 is 35.7. we add 11 to it, and yes, our solution checks out. It really is 46.7 on each side, so our answer P equals 5.1 is a correct solution. Now in our next example in letter D, we have 4c plus 20 equals 0. So again, we're going to isolate the constant by subtracting 20 from each side, and we're left with 4c equals 0 minus 20, which is negative 20. We now divide each side by 4, and c equals negative 5. So let's double check our solution to make sure we are correct. So we go 4 times negative 5 plus 20 equals 0. 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. Negative 20 plus 20 equals 0. So therefore, that is a true statement. C really does equal negative 5. Now in example 2, we have Dion wants to go on a camping trip with his hiking club. The trip costs $185.75. He paid a deposit of $45.75 and will save an additional $17.50 per week to pay for his trip. Write and solve an equation to find the number of weeks Dion will need to save money for the trip. So we already know one major thing. We know that the total cost of the trip is $185.75. Now the next thing we do know is that he gave a deposit of $45.75. So we know that that's going to be added onto whatever cost per week he has to pay. And in the next part, $17.50 per week. Well, we really don't know how much he's paying for the week because that is our variable that we're looking for. So $17.50 times W. Now we have our equation to evaluate. So in this next part, we're going to evaluate the equation by using the inverse operation. So we're going to first subtract the $45.75 from each side, so we can see how much more he needs to save up. So we go 185.75 minus 45.75. And that leaves us with 140. So now we have the $17.50 per week, and we need to divide that into the leftover money that he has to pay out. So we go 140 divided by $17.50, and that gives us 8 weeks. So W equals 8 weeks. So in other words, he will have 8 weeks to save up the last $140. Now go ahead and practice these 6 practice problems.